Excellent. Thank you, 11, and all eyes to the front. Thank you for being so patient and coming in so well. All our coats should be off, our bags should be underneath our seats, and our pencil case should be on your desk. Thank you for being so patient there as we got you all in here, because of course in the exam tomorrow you'll all have your own seating plan, so you'll know exactly where you're sitting. Now, my job at the start of this session today, before I pass over to Mr. Jones, who will lead the rest of the afternoon in your preparation for your really important language exam tomorrow, is just to remind you of a few things that Mrs. Roach, who is our exams coordinator in our school, wants to make sure, because if you can get the front of your paper right, it really helps you, but also, of course, helps the team who is running every exam in our school. So on the two screens on either side of the room, I've got the front of the answer book, because, of course, for English and other subjects which involve lots and lots of writing, then the exam papers are quite different, because you get one of these generic answer books, and it is really, really, really important that you complete these perfectly. For your sake, to make sure that your exam paper gets to the right place and your mark ends up on your mark sheet in March, but also to make sure that the invigilators can post off the perfectly completed exam papers. Just to remind you, once you're on the front of these, that you must complete, and now you haven't got a copy of these today, but of course tomorrow you will. You must complete every single section on this paper, including the school centre number, which will be on the front of every exam, on the board on the front, your candidate number, which you should know, but if not, it's on your desk when you arrive for the exams, the paper reference that you will see on the front of your paper in front of you today, and the date, which again will be on the board as you walk into the exam hall. But more importantly is completing these sections here, because that some people, believe it or not, do not complete their surname and other names. And you run the danger of your paper not being marked and you missing out on the marks for that paper. So could you please make sure tomorrow, when you're in the exam, that you do complete every section of that front page. And you are given time for that by the examiners, by the invigilators. Mr. Jones, as part of the day today, will also explain what you must do when you are answering each question to ensure that every question is highlighted and there's no confusion with your examiner. Now, I'm going to pass over now to Mr. Jones, who's going to start this mock examination. It's the first time we've tried this, so we're expecting this to make a huge difference to your preparation for your exam tomorrow. I'm going to pass over to Mr. Jones. Thank you.
Thank you. So first of all then, please, can you take out your pencil cases, a pen and a highlighter? If you do not have a highlighter, could you put your hand up and a member of staff will bring you a highlighter? There will be 4 members of staff taking you through this paper. As we move through the paper, I would like you to follow us. So, as we're reading each extract, please read with us. Take the opportunity to annotate and highlight as you go. Just some details I'd like to remind you of. There are 2 sections. First of all, section A comprehension section, which will test your reading. There are 3 questions. Each question is equally weighted in marks, and each question will have some line numbers that you will need to follow. You must not answer outside of those line numbers. There is also a section B, a writing section, which appears on the back. It is very easy to miss the back of the paper. It has happened in the past, so please make sure after you've had your first hour that you turn to the back of the paper. Another thing, some of you have a large pack with 2 papers inside of it. The front has Unit 1, the fiction paper that you will be sitting tomorrow. The second part is Unit 2, which you will be sitting on Tuesday of next week. We'll be doing another walking, talking mock on Monday, which will involve the Unit 2 paper. So today, just turn to Unit 1 at the front of the paper. As you know, there are certain timings that you need to abide by on the paper. You have an hour on the comprehension section, 20 minutes per question, 3 questions. You will need to spend 5 minutes for each question reading and annotating the text. It is essential that you annotate, as you will see. And then, once you've finished that hour, you will move on and you will spend 45 minutes on the writing section. There will be 10 minutes allotted to planning time. There will be a section on the back of the paper, if you turn with me, at the bottom of the paper, for planning. Make sure, please, that you use that space and that you plan appropriately. Okay, the first thing that you will do, once you have your paper and you've reminded yourself of the timings, you will turn inside. And you'll be confronted with an extract over 2 sides and 3 questions. The first thing that you need to do is look at the first question. So we know it says that we must read lines 1 to 25. The first thing you need to do then is highlight on your sheet lines 1 to 25. Please follow me. So you should have something that looks like that. This seems very much like Blue Peter, actually. Once you've done that, turn back to the question, and let's try to find an understanding of the question. So, question 1. What is Ian thinking and feeling in these lines? So, I think perhaps the key words here are what, the character Ian, and his thoughts and feelings. What is he thinking and feeling in these lines? Let's move now with that understanding to the extract. You will always have on an exam paper a small paragraph at the top of the page in italics, which will contextualize the passage for you. It'll tell you a little bit about the passage. It is important to read that. It will give you some vital information about the characters and what happens within the extract as a whole. So let's read that first. This passage is about a swimming race between 2 friends called Ian and Ollie. They have known each other for 20 years since university. Now, I should be prepared at this point with my highlighter and a pen to start highlighting relevant quotations that I may need to select for my response, and also with a pen in order to make some appropriate annotations. I'm going to read through the text with you. As you can imagine, because I'm actually voicing the processes in my mind, it will take me longer to actually annotate the text. So I may not annotate the entire text with you today, in the same way that other teachers, when they look at questions 2 and 3, may not annotate the entire text, and we may not have time either to answer the question in full, as we would expect you to. But nonetheless, what you will see is the process that we undertake. You will see us annotating and modelling good practice that you will need to resemble in the examination as well. So follow me with your highlighters and your pens. Ready? Said Ollie. We were by the first boy, him with his right hand pressed against it, me on the other side with my left. So far, I don't feel like I've learned much about what Ian is thinking and feeling. Ready? Go. I didn't expect a steady in-between, but the speed of Ollie's getaway caught me unawares. Now, I think that must be relevant. The fact that Ian feels that he's been caught unawares suggests that he's surprised by the speed of Ollie's getaway. So let's highlight that, and let's also annotate that. So, surprised by the speed of Ollie's getaway. Okay, I'm sorry, my writing's very small. I will try to write bigger, I'm sorry. Can you see there at the back? Great. So, he was doing breaststroke, and by opting for crawl, I should have drawn level, but even flat out, I failed to close the gap. So here, I'm aware that he is clearly desperate to draw level with Ian, and perhaps, since he failed to close the gap, feels maybe a little inadequate next to Ollie. So, inadequate. So there's a feeling. As it widened, I consoled myself that he'd gone off too fast. So we see here again, Ian consoling himself, so trying to justify to himself that perhaps he's lagging behind a little because Ollie went off too fast. So notice what I'm doing here. I'm tracking through the text. I'm being very thorough and conscientious about what I'm selecting from the text. And I'm also selecting a range of points from throughout as I'm reading. I am not just moving randomly from one point to another. The second boy was still a good distance away with the waves against us, but Ollie was coping far better. So here, Ian feels that Ollie is coping far better. When he turned and saw how far behind I was, I thought he might let up. So clearly, I don't need to use inference here. I don't need to look at what is suggested. It's quite obvious that he thought he might let up. It uses the word thought, which clearly links to the question. But winning wasn't enough for Ollie. So he thinks that winning wasn't enough for Ollie, and he wanted to humiliate me. Again, another relevant thought. With his big hands and long legs, he had the perfect physique for swimming. So he obviously thinks that Ollie has the perfect physique, and perhaps I could use a little inference here, because the fact that he's thinking about his physique suggests that perhaps he's jealous of Ollie. Whereas I fought to stay afloat. He moved smoothly over the surface. Again, this might suggest that he feels inadequate. I'm not going to continue highlighting and annotating anymore because I do need to move on, but what I will do is read the rest of this extract with you. The waves weren't high, but I was shipping water and sinking. Remember, you're continuing to highlight and annotate. Ollie, I cried, the race forgotten, terrified I was going under. Alarm bells should be ringing here, Year 11. Panic should have meant an adrenaline surge, but the gap remained the same, and I subsided to a weary doggy paddle. He's weary, he's tired, he's exhausted now. cold and exhausted and resigned to defeat all feelings. I closed my eyes to protect them from the burning salt. When I opened them again, there was Ollie just a couple of yards ahead. For a crazy moment, I thought my efforts had been rewarded, but then I saw he was treading water. Perhaps winning no longer mattered to Ollie because he had proved his point. The sight of him bobbing there enraged me. Worse still was his patronising, "Are you okay, Ian?" when my arms and legs were pure lead. "No problem," I shouted, swallowing more water. "You had me worried there." "I'm fine," I gasped. "There's the finish line, let's go." And at the end there, you could suggest that perhaps he's feeling determined to finish this race. Okay, I'm going to move on to my answer. So first of all, I need to demarcate my answer. I need to make the examiner aware of which answer I am answering at this point. So I am going to use, as it says in the question booklet, the code 11 here in the margin, in the two white boxes, which are barely visible there on the screen. I'm going to write 11 in the same way like on the next page I would write 12 and then 13. It is important that you do that. So using my notes and annotations, I'm going to start building my answer. Like I said, I'm not going to necessarily be able to finish this answer, but I will write a few points. One thing I would say at this point is it's a good idea to use a double page spread per question. And an examiner will look at every page within your answer booklet. So do make sure that you use a double page spread. So it means that if you get to question 3 and you still have some time, that means you can go back and continue to amend your answer. Okay? So, let's start. At first, Ian feels surprised. So I'm using my annotations to flesh out my answer by the speed with which Ollie gets away as he is caught, quotation marks, unawares. There's my first point, with embedded quotation. Remember, I'm going to move on now. I'm tracking through the text. It needs to be thorough, a thorough representation of the entire extract. So my next point, if you remember, so I feel surprised, he was doing breaststroke, and by opting for crawl, I should have drawn level, but even flat out, I failed to close the gap. So we could say, Ian feels desperate to draw level with Ollie. So draw level with Ollie. But feels unable and a failure. So then we come on. The second boy was still a good distance away with the waves against us, but Ollie was coping far better. So clearly, Ian thinks Ollie is coping far better. There's my embedded quotation. When he turned and saw how far behind I was, I thought he might let up. And soon Ian thinks Ollie might let up. So you can see my script is continuous. I'm continuing to write, I'm continuing to track clearly through the text in a very detailed, conscientious sort of way here. Maybe one more point then. But winning wasn't enough for Ollie. He wanted to humiliate me. So Ian thinks that winning isn't enough for Ollie, and that he wants to humiliate him. So I'd say that was a really positive start. Now, I'm not going to go on, but what I will do is share with you a 10-mark answer that I've prepared before. So you will see a lot of similarity between what I've just written and what I've written here. At first, Ian is surprised by the speed of Ollie's getaway as he is caught unawares. He seems to feel inadequate as he failed to close the gap, but consoles himself that Ollie had gone off too fast. Ian thinks that Ollie was coping far better and believes winning wasn't enough for Ollie. He wanted to humiliate him. Ian thinks, and notice how I'm using the wording of the question, I'm using the word thinks, I'm using the word feels, and I'm also using words like suggests, implies, in order to meet the criteria of inference, making inference, looking at what is suggested and implied. Ian thinks Ollie had the perfect physique for swimming, suggesting he feels jealous, and again, inadequate as Ian fought to stay afloat. As Ian was shipping water and sinking, he feels terrified. He thinks that his panic should have meant an adrenaline surge, but instead, he feels cold, exhausted, and resigned to defeat. For a moment, Ian catches up with Ollie, and he thinks, my efforts have been rewarded, but then he realises Ollie is just treading water. The sight of Ollie bobbing there enrages Ian, and he feels patronised by Ollie's "Are you okay, Ian?" Ian's arms and legs feel like pure lead as he gasps determinedly, "I'm fine and let's go."
Okay, I'm going to take you through the second section, or the second question. So if you can all turn with me to the second question, and we'll do exactly the same thing this time. Now we're looking at lines 26 to 54. So we're going to take our highlighters again to mark out lines 26 to 54. And straight away then what I can see from the question is that this one's a little bit different. So I can see here that we've got a how question. This means that I need to do some explaining in my answer. I need to explain the choices that the writer has made, why they've decided to use certain language choices in order to make these lines dramatic and exciting. So I know straight away in my answer that I need to use the words dramatic and exciting, and I need to explain how the writer has done this. In order to get into the top band, it is important that you do explain how the writer has made lines tense and dramatic, rather than just saying what is there. So this is a matter of content, as well as explaining how. Okay, if we can turn then to the section that we're looking at, starting on line 26. Over. I'll take you through in the same way as Mr. Jones did. We'll go through and we'll annotate together, and then I'll have a go at writing a response to show you the process that I would go through, okay? The difference with this one is obviously that we're going to be explaining how in a little bit more detail. So, thumbs up. He turned and swung around. desperate to stay ahead as usual. Well, straight away, I can tell that this is becoming quite a dramatic scene because he uses the word desperate. So here, got your pen. It's okay, don't worry, I've got it. Here, the word desperate shows me that this is a battle. It goes on, the wave that broke over him as he turned wasn't huge, but it knocked him back. Well, again, the excitement is building here in the text because they were in a race and now they've become level. So actually, the fact that this wave has knocked him back has shown me that they've become level, which builds the excitement because you don't know who is going to win the race. I saw it coming and dived below. When I surfaced, Ollie was next to me, but he looked tired, like me, allowing the swell to carry him over the next few waves. I closed my eyes, driving forward, almost home. Well, again, the phrase driving forward here creates drama because we know that Ian is starting to compete now with Ollie. So if we put compete in the margin. It continues. 10 feet from the finish, we collided with a violent thud. I remember I said with the how questions, you need to look at word choices that have been made by the writer. Well, this phrase, the violent thud, and in particular the word violent, is a really powerful word to be used and shows how they've collided. So it was a violent thud. I kicked out to get clear, but he came back at me, clutching my arm. And that phrase there, clutching, again, brings a sense of excitement, the fact that they are battling. Since I was now the one nearer the finish, I thought he'd done it to pull me back, and I shoved him away. So here, as I'm reading, I can see that it's getting exciting because the men are battling, and they're physically fighting now for the place in the front. And actually these words here, clutched and shoved, show me that this fight is physical and that it's quite aggressive, which makes it both dramatic and exciting because you don't know who is going to win. The shove sent him down, and I stopped for a second to check he was all right. When he lunged upwards, I saw it had been a ploy. Well, that phrase again, I saw it had been a ploy, brings excitement into the story because actually, as a reader, I'm now uncertain as to whether Ollie was actually drowning or whether he was actually trying to trick Ian. So it brings in the sense of uncertainty. And in my answer, I'd explain that it makes it exciting because as a reader, the writer has made us feel uncertain about the outcome, okay? And there you're explaining your how. So moving on, his eyes looked bright and eager and he grabbed my arm again. I tried to shake him off, but his arms snaked around me, dragging us both down. So again, it's these phrases here, the idea of being dragged down. I wanted to shout at him to stop messing around, that no bet was worth risking death for. Well, there, again, straight away, I think, the fact that the writer has used the word death, for me, brings to mind that this is a battle for survival, and that adds a real sense of drama to the text. And we also get the impression that actually, at the end of this narrative, it could mean death for one of these characters. Okay? So as Mr. Jones did, I'm going to stop annotating there and read the rest with you. What I'd like you to be doing as I'm reading is the same thing, going through and actually annotating, okay? And make sure that you are highlighting and annotating as I'm reading. I'll read it slowly so you can track. You should be tracking through the text, thinking about what is the content, what is there, but equally, how do those words or phrases, or how does the tone make it, remember the wording from the question was how does it make it tense and exciting, okay? Those words that we had, dramatic and exciting, sorry, those words that we had there. So, where were we? But my mouth was shut against the water, so no bet was worth risking death for, but my mouth was shut against the water. I let my body go slack, in the hope he'd do the same, but it didn't work. We sank like two statues. Surely even Ollie can't hold his breath much longer, I thought. But he kept going down into the blackness, my body tied to his. I punched him in the face, but the water deadened the blow. I kneed him in the stomach, but my knee rebounded. Friendship no longer counted. With my last dregs of strength, I pushed his neck back until he was underneath me. My legs now had my weight behind them, and I kicked so that I could tread him down. I trod him like grapes until his hands slackened and he floated away. Trodden under, trodden down. Back on top, I coughed and gasped, my eyes scorched by salt, my lungs exploding. For a time, I lay with my head tipped back, feeling the cold water beneath me. Once I got my breath back and the blood stopped pounding in my ears, I swung myself upright. Where had Ollie gone? It briefly occurred to me he hadn't been fooling, but it seemed more likely he'd popped up and sneakily pipped me to the finish. Taking no chances, I paddled the last few yards and touched the boy with the fingers of my right hand. Looking round, exhausted and triumphant, I could still see no sign. Joke's over, Ollie. Where are you? I shouted. I took a deep breath and prepared to dive down. What I'm going to do now then is show you how I would start and write a response to this question. I'm not going to write the whole thing, I'm just going to start it, and then I'll show you how I would have actually finished and completed that response. I'm going to do the same thing as Mr. Jones did and actually use a double page, okay, because it allows me to go back if needs be and fill in a few more points. And again, I need to highlight which question I'm answering, so in the margin I'm going to put that this is section 1, question 2. Okay, and I'm going to look at my annotations, and I'll notice that the first thing that I've highlighted is desperate, and I've talked about battle. So that's how I'm going to begin. And remembering that the question asked us about drama and excitement. So, I'm left-handed, sorry, so I'm going to have to swivel it. I'm going to start with the extract. Creates, and then using the words from the question, creates drama. And then going back to my sheet, I'm going to have a look how I've tracked. So it creates drama from the start by describing and I'm going to use really short quotations that you just want to embed into your sentences. You don't want to copy out large chunks of text. So this time I'm just going to use the word desperate. Race between and then I just need to, so I've made my point, I've given evidence, but now what I need to do is actually explain how that creates a bit of drama. So I'm going to say that the word desperate actually emphasises, so and emphasises that, so they are battling to win. So there I've given a clear point, made a point about the drama, the fact that it's created by the word desperate, and I've explained that by emphasising that word desperate, it shows that they're battling. when I write these responses, the way I tend to do it is that I take a new line for a separate point. You don't have to do it that way, but for me, it allows me to see how many points I've made. So I'm going to start my next point on my next line, and I'm going to put down that this time, again, using the wording from the question. So the race becomes even more dramatic. And checking my text again. So the next bit I had was when he knocked him back. So when Ollie is knocked back. Okay, so then again I've referred to how it's dramatic, I've given my evidence, and now I need to explain that. So this makes it dramatic because they're now level. So they're now level in the race, and it creates a tense atmosphere. So as a reader, we don't know who is actually going to win. And then I'm going to pick up on the word violent. I'm going to point something out to you. I'm not going to refer to this bit here that I've highlighted. I've talked about it driving forward, and I've used the word compete. I'm not going to use that point because actually I've already talked about how they're battling, how they're already competing. So I don't want to repeat that phrase. It won't get me a mark by saying the same thing again. So I'm going to take a separate point, something that's really different. So I'm going to take the idea of it being a violent thud. Okay. And again, I'm going to use the wording from the question. So I'm going to start with drama is created. When Ollie and Ian okay, so there I've given my point about it being dramatic, given the evidence, and I just need to explain then. I remember when I was reading it, I thought the word violent was particularly important, so I'd pick up on that and I'd explain that the word violent, and using my annotations I wrote powerful, so I'm going to use that one. So the word violent is powerful, and it foreshadows or it tells us or hints at what happens next. Okay, so there I've actually talked about the drama, I've given my evidence, really short evidence, keep it really concise, and then I've explained the word that's used. I'm not going to write anymore, I'm just going to show you how I would respond to that fully. So I've just continued my points using the evidence that I had from my annotation. I've said that, I'll take you through it. The friends begin to physically fight, and Ollie is clutching Ian's arm, and he shoved him away. Importantly, what I haven't done is I haven't copied out all the lines, okay? I've just picked the word clutching and the phrase shoved him away. Don't waste time copying out larger chunks of text, okay? Be selective. So the dramatic language used shows their aggression and seriousness of the fight. Okay. So there's my point about it being a physical fight, the evidence, and I'm explaining it by talking about the dramatic language. Again, I'm using the word from the question, so an exciting atmosphere is created when Ollie lunges and Ian thinks that it had been a ploy. This makes the reader feel uncertain as we don't know who to trust. Okay, and again, linking back to how it's exciting because as a reader we don't know. Ian says that no bet was worth risking death. By referring to death, the writer makes it exciting as this is a battle for survival. So again, I'm explaining how by picking out those specific words and phrases. Drama is built when Ian states that friendship no longer counted. The writer uses a dark and harsh tone to suggest his description, and this shocks the reader. So again, I'm explaining how I'd react, how it makes it exciting. During the fight, Ian tries to save himself and he treads on Ollie. This makes it dramatic as his need to survive had overcome the friendship. So again, even though I didn't use the wording from the question in the start, I referred to drama or excitement again here. The writer emphasises the drama through repeating the word trodden, which makes Ian seem brutal, and we feel concern for Ollie. Ian describes his eyes as being scorched by salt and lungs exploding. This creates excitement as the reader understands that it was a near-death experience. And then the final point I'm going to make, and I've made sure when I'm tracking through my text that I've taken something from the start, the middle and the end of it. There's a reason they give you those line numbers. They want you to choose something from the whole section. So I've gone to the end now, and it ends with Ollie still missing, and Ian thinks that maybe he hadn't been fooling. A drama is created as the reader has only heard one side of the story, and we wonder what has happened to Ollie. So key things to remember with how questions are that you do need to explain the content, what the writer has said, and then how the writer has chosen specific language features or words and phrases in order to create certain meaning.
Okay, so I'm going to take you through question number 3. So if we all have a look at that, please. And it says straight away, read lines 55 to 73, which is the final part of the extract. So I would, as before, mark that clearly, just so we're sure, especially where it starts. Now, this question's a little bit different because it is in 2 parts. So the first part of the question is what happens? So you're looking for precisely what's going on in what you're reading, the events of the passage. And also then we're expected to tell the examiner how we react. It asks us how do we react to what happens. So 2 parts to this question. First of all, we're thinking about what actually happens, the events of this little passage, and also then thinking about our own personal response to these events. Okay, so as before, I'll take you through the annotations. I won't do all of them, I'll just do some, the same as before. So, you got the highlighter? Thanks. So, I'll read it with you. It was then that Rufus broke the water, nosing up from the depths like a seal. Okay, so Rufus breaks the water. We can annotate that straight away with the dog appears. So straight away we've got a little event there. What's happening? The dog is appearing. Here, boy, I said as he frantically paddled my way. Okay, so the dog is now coming towards Ian. This word frantically perhaps suggested that the dog is in trouble. So the dog is having some sort of problems, is moving towards Ian. Perhaps here we could react, we could tell our feelings here, especially as in the next line it says, normally dogs are good swimmers, but Rufus was in trouble and the sight of him was more than I could bear. Okay, so perhaps we can react to that. We can perhaps say we feel concern for the dog. Normally dogs are good swimmers, but Rufus was in trouble and the sight of him was more than I could bear. I grabbed him by the collar and hauled him upwards. Okay, so there we have another event. Ian begins to save the dog. He makes the decision to save Rufus. I had little strength left and Rufus was a dead weight, his sodden fur dragging him down. Okay, so here you can have several reactions to what's going on in terms of a personal response. So on the one hand, we can feel perhaps that Ian is heroic for rescuing the dog. But on the other hand, we must remember that his friend is in trouble, his friend is drowning, and he has forgotten about that to try and save the dog. So we might start being concerned that Ollie is forgotten. So that would be, I think, a much better personal response, because you're really thinking about what you're reading there. Okay, so he's heroic because he's saving the dog, but really thinking about what we read and reading between the lines, we're noticing that Ollie has been forgotten in all of this. Okay, by keeping his head above water with one hand and paddling with the other, I managed to steer us both towards the shore. Okay, so there's an event there, gets the dog to safety. Close in, where the waves broke, I nearly lost him again, but at last my feet touched bottom and I pushed him onto the safety of the shingle. Again, there we can have, with these three sentences, a mixed response. Whilst on the one hand we could be glad the dog is safe, we also get the sense that Ian is emphasizing his own heroism. So he's forgotten all about his friend that he just fought with and is now lost at sea, and he is focusing on this dog. But not only that, he keeps repeating to us how heroic he was in saving the dog. I managed to steer us both towards the shore. I nearly lost him. At last my feet touched bottom and I pushed him to the safety of the shingle. We get a sense here that Ian is trying to convince us that he's doing a good thing. So we could say perhaps that Ian is self-absorbed here. Maybe we're having a bit more of a negative response to Ian than we would expect from, than if he was just saving the dog without Ollie drowning. But we have to be aware of those events that are happening while he's doing this. Okay, I'll stop the annotations there, but as before, I'm going to read it through, and I would like you to continue making little annotations, particularly thinking about your personal response to what's happening. Only then was I free to swing round and scan the sea. Surely Ollie would be visible by now. But between the two boys was green and white water, nothing else. So simply there, Ian has begun to search for Ollie. Because he sees nothing, perhaps we start, our concern actually starts building for Ollie here. Before we were wondering, weren't we, whether, perhaps, they might be messing around, this might be more fun and games than serious. Now we're becoming a little bit concerned that Ollie is actually lost in the water. I swam out again and searched for as long as I could. Near the second boy, my hopes rose as a large black shape appeared. So another key event there. Ian is searching, a shape appears. It's not Ian, so his hopes are raised. But when I closed my hands on it, it met wood. 10 minutes passed, maybe 20, maybe more. So again, we're getting the sense that he's emphasizing his own heroism there, telling us all about how he's searching for Ian. We can also be a little bit concerned, can't we? We know that Ian's not the best swimmer, and he's out there searching for Ollie. We're wondering actually about his capabilities for doing so. I kept expecting Ollie to bob up against the odds. He grabbed my leg as I clambered through the waves. He tapped me on the shoulder as I put on my clothes. He'd leap from a sand hollow as Rufus and I shivered through the dunes. He'd be the one taking the car keys from his pocket, the one making the 999 call, the one breaking the news, the one holding Daisy as she howled, the one saying he'd done all he could, the one who had got home safely, who'd pulled through, who'd won, who'd lived to tell the tale. So there we get Ollie slowly coming to terms with the fact that, in fact, he has probably killed his friend, and he's going to have to go through all this process, calling 999, letting the family know, getting in the car and having to tell his family and his friends what has happened. Okay, I'm going to move on now to start writing the answer. Again, I'm going to use a double page spread just so that if I run out of time, I can come back and I can add a little bit more, or I can edit. So the question number is 1-3. So as said before, do make sure that is written in so it's very, very clear which question you are answering. Okay, so we start at the very beginning. As with the other questions, you track through chronologically. Don't jump around. So I have my annotations in front of me, next to me on the desk as I'm answering, constantly looking back at the passage and my annotations and highlighting. So I could start before diving down. So placing ourselves, letting the reader know exactly which part of the text we are referring to before diving down to search for Ollie. Ian suddenly notices Rufus, the dog, surfacing. So that is simply what has happened. I'm paraphrasing the text, and I've put a little quotation there. I've used a word from the text, used that word surfacing, just to show that I am closely engaging with what I'm reading. The dog is in trouble. Again, they're summarizing the text. It's wordy in the text itself, describes what the dog's doing. Instead, we're just saying the dog is in trouble, in trouble, frantically. Again, using just a word there, a tiny little quotation from the text embedded in my sentence, just to show that I am very closely engaging with what I read. Frantically paddling his way. Ian rescues the dog. Although he nearly lost him. Again, they're using that little mini quotation just to show the close engagement with the text there. Although he nearly lost him, he manages to steer them both to shore. So a neat little summary there of what I've read, using little chunks, little pieces of quotation just to show that I'm very much tracking through the text and closely engaged with the text. Now I'm going to start thinking about my own personal response to what I read. So we're looking back at the annotations, looking at how I reacted. No need to simply reread what I've already read. I can look at my annotations. So we've got initially there, the dog, we've got concern for the dog. Ollie may be heroic, and also that we're concerned that Ollie is forgotten. So my personal response here is Ian's sudden fixation on the dog, forgetting Ollie, and the emphasis he places on his own heroism. So there I'm given a sophisticated personal response. I'm noticing that Ian, who's narrating, is emphasizing his heroism. Okay, I've noticed that Ian is perhaps an unreliable narrator. He's not narrating events simply as they happened. He's putting his own personal spin on them. It is good to be aware of that. Sudden fixation of it. The emphasis he places on his heroism in saving the dog made me think. So there I'm engaging directly with the question there. They've asked me what I think and feel, how I respond. I'm saying, this made me think. that now I'm clearly giving a personal response. Ian is trying to ease his conscience and make the reader look favourably on him. Okay, because in this particular passage we've got a few sections which are chunks, which are events in and of themselves. We've got the appearance of the dog and the rescuing of the dog. We've got Ian searching for Ollie, and then we've got Ian's coming to terms with the fact that Ollie might be dead. They are three distinct events. So what I've done with this response is I have looked at each of those events in turn, written out what happens, and then given my response to those events in turn. If the passage that you read is one longer event, it may be worth doing it in one big chunk or in two chunks. You don't have to do it this way. Okay, you could do it first of all, writing out what happens and then giving your response, your personal response, one big chunk, one big chunk. In this case, I think it's much more suitable because there's those three distinct events to use 3 paragraphs. Okay, I'm going to show you a full response now and talk you through the remainder of what I have written. Okay, so we got about up to here. Make the reader look favourable upon him. Despite him saving the dog, this event made me feel Ian might be cowardly and self-absorbed rather than heroic. So there you're giving opinions on the character, and also you're using those words, that word feel. Okay, so clearly here you are giving your personal response. After saving Rufus, Ian scans the sea and searches for Ollie as long as he could. You'll notice here that I've embedded these quotations, and in order to make the quotations fit into my sentence, I've used these square brackets. I've replaced the word I here with he, just so it fits into the sentence. That's absolutely fine to do as long as you use those square brackets. His hopes raise at one point when a large black shape appears, but is only a lump of wood. Ian spends 10 minutes, maybe 20, maybe more, searching for Ollie. Okay, there I have summarised the events of that particular section where Ian is searching for Ollie, and now I'm going to begin to give my personal response. At this point, I began to feel sorry for Ian. Despite being a weak swimmer, he is willing to risk his life searching for his friend. So a slightly different personal response there. I'm feeling sorry for Ian because we know he's a weak swimmer, using our knowledge there, and thinking that must be a hard thing for him to do. In addition, so sophisticated use of language there, at this point, my concern for Ollie increased. Not only is it clear now that Ollie is in serious danger, but Ian, being both a poor swimmer and in shock/denial, he expects Ollie to bob up or tap him on the shoulder, makes me doubt his ability to save his friend. So not only have I given my personal response there, I've suggested how my personal response changed as I read the piece, read the extract. Okay, so I've tracked through. I didn't have the same personal response all the way through that extract. It actually changed a little bit. Okay, the final sentences, again, making it very, very clear. I'm marking where I am in the text. It's clear that I'm tracking through. The final sentences track Ian quickly coming to terms with what has happened. Initially, Ian believes Ollie is going to leap out from a sand dune, but quickly realises he is going to have to call 999 and break the news to his family. This gave me a real sense of the tragedy that has occurred. Okay, this gave me a sense. Again, that's my response. Ollie's death becomes a reality. Ian's comments that he had won and lived to tell the tale do seem overly positive. This made me feel that Ian may in fact be a villain rather than an innocent bystander in an accident. Okay, so I've given my personal response there to the final sentences as well. So I've tracked through the entire section of the extract in my response, writing out what happens, using little bits of quotation just to show close engagement with the text, and then after each major event, I've given my personal response. using words like I think, I feel, I get a sense that. Okay?
So at this point, it's 6 minutes past 2, and we're going to be moving on to the writing. So if we think about the exam in the light of tomorrow's event, then of course it's going to be 6 minutes past 10, and we'll be moving on quickly onto the writing section. So could you turn, please, to the back of your papers.
Okay, year 11, as Mr. Jones said, I'm going to look at the writing section with you, which is on the back of the exam paper. Please do not forget to turn over and do the writing section. Somebody in this room will. Don't let it be you. Really important. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to remind myself of the time that I'm going to use for this section. It does advise you on the front to spend 10 minutes planning. That is absolutely essential if you're going to write a really good quality answer. Then I've got 35 minutes for writing. Ideally, I'd like to spend the last 5 minutes of that proofreading, but I'll have to see how I get on. I'm going to remind myself of the instructions at the top. It says that in this section, I'll be assessed for the quality of my writing skills. I know that's really important. Next, it says half of the marks are awarded for content. So I'm going to have to think carefully about what I write about. I know that has to be based very, very closely on one of the titles. One of the criteria will say a focused answer. Also, I don't want to write anything too dramatic. I don't want to be overly ambitious. I don't need car chases, plane crashes, anything like that. I'm going to keep it based in reality, but I'm going to try and make it engaging by the way that I actually tell the story. It says half for content and organisation, so I know that I'm going to have to divide it effectively into paragraphs. Half of the marks are awarded for sentence structure. Now, I know for that I'm going to have to vary my sentences. I'm going to have to use a mixture of short sentences for dramatic impact, longer sentences to include more detail. Punctuation, I'm going to make sure that I try to use a range of punctuation, but more importantly is accuracy. Obviously, I'm going to use things like capital letters at the start of sentences, capital letters for proper nouns. I know it will look really bad if I don't do that. Spelling, I'm going to have to be very accurate with, and I know, and I'm going to just write down to remind myself, that it's those particularly commonly misspelt words that are really going to lose me marks. So I'm going to remind myself, I'm going to write a lot as 2 words. I'm not going to confuse there and there, to and to, there's homophones. I'm certainly not going to write could of. I'm going to put apostrophe, VE, should have, would have. Those things are really important. It's those basic spelling errors that will lose you marks. I'm going to remind myself here, it tells me that I should aim to write between 500 and 600 words. Although quality is essential, I do need to make sure that I write enough to meet all the criteria. So I should be aiming for about 2 sides at least in the answer booklet. Okay, I'm now going to choose one of the titles of my writing. I'm not going to spend ages doing this. There are always similarly worded questions. You always get a choice from 5. There is always one like the first one, which will tell you to write a story which ends with a sentence or a phrase. I wouldn't touch that with a barge pole because I know it's a little bit risky. I might run out of time. I might not ever get to that ending. My story might not fit. It might seem a little bit forced, a little bit awkward. The next one is the return. I've got a little anecdote, a little personal story that I think would be appropriate for that. I'll just look at the others. I know that I always get one that does say, write about a time when something happened, usually inviting you to tell something about your life. In this case, a time when you tried to mend something. Nothing immediately springs to mind, so I'm not going to do that one. Write a story which begins. And again, I know I always get one that will ask me to write the opening of a story. We were now late and Mum had started to panic. Possibility, but again, nothing immediately springs to mind, so I don't think I'll do that one. The last one again, the medal. I've never won a medal, so I don't think I'll do that one. So I'm going to stick with the return. Underneath, it tells me that there's a space where I can plan my work. Again, I know this is absolutely essential to spend a little bit of time planning. I'm just going to remind myself of some other things that I need to include in my story. I know that I want to try and have a scene setting opening. I want to include some convincing characters, but not too many in the time that I've got. I'm going to try and include a bit of dialogue, not too much. I don't want to get into the he said, she said that goes on for pages. It gets very tedious. Also, I know I want some detailed description in there somewhere. Okay, and underneath I'm going to do my plan. I like to do a kind of story mountain type thing, but how you do your plan is up to you. I'm going to do my mountain. I know I need a beginning, a build-up to a climax, just like every EastEnders episode. I'm going to have some kind of resolution and then my ending, and I'm really going to make sure that in my ending I return to the title, which is the return. That's good, isn't it? I'm going to return to the return. So my beginning, so I've got this little personal story in mind. Tonight you could be thinking of little incidents that have happened to you that you could perhaps turn into a story tomorrow. I'm going to start with the idea that I've always wanted a pet. In my build-up, I'm going to explain that I get a rabbit. I'm going to describe that rabbit, the fun times that we have together. Climax, you could see this coming. My rabbit is going to get lost. Resolution, not happy when I'm afraid. The rabbit gets killed by next door's dog. You might need some tissues when we get to that bit. And then the ending, I'm going to say something about the return. Really good, so if you can return to your title at the end of your story. So that's my plan, fairly simple. As you can see, I'm going to base it on a fairly everyday occurrence, not too everyday hopefully, but something that I'm sure we can all relate to. Yep. And now I'm going to show you the story. I didn't write this. This is actually a student that wrote this in last year's exam. No sense of direction. Okay, so this is called The Return. Really good to actually write the title. I know that seems obvious, but when I've examined these stories, sometimes you get halfway through and you still don't know which title they've chosen. So write it at the top just to help. I'm going to read this with an examiner head on and show you what kind of things the examiners are going to give you credit for, what kind of things they are looking out for. Okay, so I want a nice engaging opening if possible. I'm getting a bit tired. I've marked a lot of these scripts today. I'd wanted a pet for so long. Not a lousy goldfish that doesn't last longer than 3 weeks, or even a stray snail found in the garden and kept in a cleaned out jam jar. I wanted a small fluffy rabbit. Is it really much to ask for? Already I'm thinking there's some nice bits of humour in here which are very engaging. There's a lovely rhetorical question here which again engages me. And this really makes me want to read on and find out what's going to happen. After years of asking, my cunning plan of designing a PowerPoint showing reasons as to why a rabbit was a suitable pet for me. Again, a lovely little bit of humour with the PowerPoint. We all like a good PowerPoint. Mum finally gave into it. The day we brought the little ball of fur home, nice not to keep repeating rabbit, was all very exciting. I chose a tiny little fawn rabbit. Oh, sorry, I'll get my red pen out here for the spelling mistake. Fawn rabbit, your examiner will identify every single mistake that you make in terms of spelling and punctuation. So I've underlined fawn rabbit at the pet shop. I named it Lexi. Very nice. Lexi permanently had one ear standing as straight as a soldier and one that flopped over her left eye. Really nice, endearing description here. After a few days, Lexi had gotten used to her new home. She lived in a rustic-looking hutch that Dad had made, and painted ready for her. It wasn't great, but it fitted the job, and the rabbit seemed happy. It's nice enough, some description there of the hutch. I like how this candidate is using discourse markers at the start of paragraphs to show progression. A week later, I decided it was time Lexi had a run about. There was plenty of sweet green grass for her to eat. Also, there were lots of obstacles to play with in our garden. Tons of my little brother's football and baseball sets. Lexi would have a whale of a time out there. Again, quite nicely paragraphed. Accurate punctuation, got an apostrophe in the right place, exclamation mark for impact. One day, I came home from school and went to check on Lexi. She was looking rather bored, so I thought then was the perfect time to let her out. As I turned the latch on the downstairs door of the hutch, Lexi raced down the stairs. I slowly creaked open, the spelling mistake, the wooden door to the wooden door to find Lexi's tiny twitchy nose poking out of the door crack. Again, some nice description in here. As the door fully opened, Lexi shot out of the hutch, sprinting faster than I'd ever seen a creature run. Quite a nice little surprise at the end there. Again, this is nicely paragraphed. I've got progression between paragraphs. Really thought about the construction of this. I sat and watched her for a while as she inspected her surroundings. She left her markings underneath the garden chairs on our patio. Then I thought it best to leave her alone to play. When I came back out to look for her, she was hiding. Oh dear. I searched around the garden in all the best hiding places. There was no way out of the garden, I thought. Again, nicely paragraphed here, leaving that on a little bit of a cliffhanger and suggesting to me that all is not going to be as I thought. As I calculated the garden fence, the spelling mistake there, I found a small hole in the bottom that led, another spelling mistake, into next door's garden. I decided to go and check their garden too, just in case she'd squeezed through the hole. I nervously knocked, should have been an on their front door, in the hope of finding Lexi. I usually hear their dog scratching the door and barking ferociously when I knock. Some nice adverbs in here, just to add a little bit more detail. This time, only Mary, the little old lady who lived in the house, answered. That sounds a little bit ominous and quite a sophisticated thing to do, perhaps to hint at something that might happen later. I'm going to give that a tick. Bit of dialogue here. Could I check your garden, Mary? Only I can't find my rabbit, I asked, whilst my bottom lip trembled a little. This is a nice description and very good to show how you're feeling rather than telling. And you know that if your bottom lip quivers a little bit, you're a bit upset and perhaps are trying to hide it. Of course, darling, come on in, Mary replied sweetly. I scurried through the rose-scented, china-decorated living room. Some very nice description here, very economical with the use of these compound adjectives, setting the scene, so very economically. into the abandoned garden. Mary was simply too old for mowing grass these days. Again, a nice little bit of character development, but very economical. I searched for a while until I got stopped. I turned slowly. There was Lexi. Here we've got some nice short sentences that really create dramatic impact and signal to me, the reader, that perhaps something bad is going to happen. She was not alone. Another nice short sentence. She was hanging silently from Mary's dog's slobbery mouth. Oh dear. Nice paragraphing here, ending on this dramatic point, accurately punctuated, quite difficult, there were 2 apostrophes for possession. Next, we've got a nice short paragraph for impact, really good to try and vary the length of your paragraphs as well as sentences, and sometimes if you can be really bold and use these really short paragraphs, it can be really impressive. I gasped in terror. I then tackled the dog until I got my Lexi off it. Nice to use that possessive pronoun there, my Lexi, just kind of adds a little bit to the poignancy. Next paragraph, I ran back into the old lady's house, carrying the rabbit with the dog following behind. I laid, spelling mistake, should be L-A-I-D, I laid her on the doormat and tried to wake her up. Again, this is nicely paragraphed, ending on kind of cliffhangers, keeping the reader waiting, a little dramatic pause for effect, and then a lovely single sentence paragraph, she made no movement. I'm already thinking that this candidate is using a lot of varied sentence structures, varied paragraphs, is really, really thinking about the reader and the impact that they're having on the reader, which is quite a sophisticated thing to do and that will get you higher grades. The rabbit had taken its last breath and there was nothing I could do. I wept, spelling mistake, as I brought the rabbit close to my body. I held her like a baby. Quite moving, but not overly sentimental. And then here we have our concluding paragraph in which we've returned to the title. This was a return, but not quite the return I'd hoped it would be. Oh dear. But really nicely focused there at the end. Okay, so just in conclusion, thinking about some of the things this candidate has done in terms of content and organisation. The content is very engaging. It really made me want to read on. It kept me interested throughout. It was really focused on the task and lovely to return to the return at the end. Also, really effective paragraphing. Remember, this comes in content and organisation. Perhaps slightly lacking in ambition in terms of vocabulary, but in a way that seemed quite appropriate for the fairly simple story told by a young child. Okay, and I can tell you that for content and organisation, this actually got 13 out of 15, so quite a high score that would have been into the top band. In terms of sentence structure, spelling and punctuation, a real good variety of sentences. Spelling, things were fluent, but there were some fairly basic errors. Not many, but there were some. Punctuation was accurate, but perhaps lacked ambition. And I can tell you, because of those, mainly the few mistakes in terms of spelling, this got 10 out of 15 for that particular section. So that you can see, the shame really, that a very good story, I'm sure you'll agree, very engaging, not overly ambitious, but very well told. But unfortunately, they've dropped 5 marks just really for a matter of a few spelling mistakes, and just shows you how important that is. Okay. How are we doing for time, sir? Okay. In the time that we've got left then, a really good idea. I'm sure you've all got stories in mind, anecdotes quotes that you can draw on. Remember, this doesn't have to be true. It can be based in the truth. So you can think of an incident that's either happened to you or somebody that you know. Although the titles that you'll get tomorrow will obviously be different, they are all kind of similar, certainly in structure, and often they do invite you to write about personal experiences. Remember, you can exaggerate things a little bit, but please remember you don't have to be overly dramatic. So in the time that we've got, if you want to just take some time, and you can have the 10 minutes as you would have in the exam, to actually do a little plan, similar to the one that I did at the beginning. Creating a beginning, a build-up, a climax, a resolution and an ending for one of the titles that you've got on the sheet in front of you for section B.
10 minutes starting now then, please. Okay, that's 10 minutes. You would at this point, of course, move on to the actual writing. So you'd spend 35 minutes at this point writing, and then, of course, proofreading and checking your answer at the end. And, of course, what you have effectively now is a paper that you've thoroughly annotated in readiness to answer all 3 questions, and a map of a story that you could then go on to write at home tonight in preparation and revision for tomorrow's examination. And I would advise you all to do that. So at the end of today's session, you can take away these papers and do just that. But in the meantime, in the last 20 minutes available to us, I think it would be useful to spend time answering question 1. So you have the annotations. If you could go back and revisit the extract with your highlighter and your pen, just finishing off perhaps some of the annotations you may have missed at the end. Spend this time advantageously, using the time to formulate an answer to that, and then it'll be time to pack away. But thank you very much for listening so attentively today, and I hope you found the whole session useful. I'd like to thank Mrs. Atkins, Mr. Lewis and Miss Jenkins for taking their time to prepare answers for you and going through that with you, so thank you very much for doing that. You will have another walking talking mock on Monday on Unit 2, the non-fiction paper, before Tuesday's Unit 2 examination. Thank you very much. If you need a sheet of lined paper, could you put your hand up, please? Okay, that's 15 minutes. So if you could bring your responses to a close, please. Okay, if I could have your attention for a moment. Everybody facing this way quietly, please. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for behaving as well as you have. You've been exemplary this afternoon. It has been a pleasure actually teaching you this. And you can imagine sitting in front of 260 people going through this paper can be a little bit nerve-wracking, but nonetheless, you've listened attentively, and I have every faith in your success in this examination tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening as attentively as you have. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to pack away. So if you still have a highlighter, could you hold it up in the air so we can collect it, please? Remember that the exam paper and the piece of line paper that you've just used for your response are now yours, and you can take those away with you today. Like I said, let me just reiterate that you should really go home and use this mock exam paper and your annotations there to finish up. You may pack away and stand quietly behind your chairs, which I'd like you to push under your tables, please.
Chairs under. I'm going to dismiss you row by row. Okay, the row at my far left, you may leave through the fire exit here. And then the row to the far right, you can leave through the blue doors there. Please, off you go. And the next row at the far left. The row at the far right. Left. Right. Left. 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 And right. Thank you very much.
How many schools you go like that? You 11 leave like that. 2 hours. How many schools?
Perfect, I know.
Oh my.
Perfect.
Oh,
There you are, Di, that's yours. I know it's not.
thank you.
should do all that teaching
Do you know, actually I do too. Hello, Tad.
Do you know what? Would you mark this for me and give it to my next lesson and say how it is? Just that.
But you're not going to have this back in time for tomorrow now. This is
I know,
your
I
story.
just wanted to know what it would be. The marks.
Are you catching a bus now?
Yeah.
Okay, you go to your bus then, and
So just ignore the stimulus. Would this be a good story?
okay, thank you, Tad. Yeah, and good. Well, I mean, that immediately using simple sentence there as a floating paragraph. That's looking superb, beautifully paragraphed. I mean, structurally, it looks wonderful. So that's a great start. Thanks, Tad.
So I haven't done that before, but they
Okay.
didn't teach me that at college, so I'm not sure if that's how you'd ever paragraph something.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. Honestly, that kind of stuff is going to get you a lot of credit. Honestly, did you find it useful? Yeah. Good. Right, go and catch a bus. Oh, just in time.
Sounds fun.
Sorry. Chairs. Why are these? Why are these here?
There's a spare one.
Oh,
ones that were written on? Yeah.
Well, I think it happened just at the end there, so that's marvellous, isn't it? Okay, boys? Yes. It will probably take a half an hour.
What's it for?
Oh, they probably want to clear to do some sports.
Oh, right, yeah, okay. Are we going to keep these?
What?
The ones that have been annotated?
No, we don't need to. I mean,
And because it's got the answers as well.
let's keep them for the time being.
How many answer books?
3.
You all could have used.
Yeah, no, because we had to use different ones because we had to prepare answers.
Oh. So there's 1, 2.
Oh, give me this is the Kerry's Teague. Damn it.
She forgot. That's a spare one. That's a spare one. Right.
During the. Was it one of you two? Did you want to sleep during the. Hiding behind the screen?
I think it might be Jake's actually.
Probably Jake's.
Well, I don't know. I think 'cause if there's people sitting right at the very back, then maybe. Because the people presenting, so it's going to be Tracy, there'll be Jake, or maybe not actually, maybe not. Easier not. Then let's not. And I think the acoustics in there will be better. Then let's leave it. Yeah. Obviously, I need the camera. But don't need the microphone.
I love how it's so striking.
That's fine. Yeah, and the acoustics are probably better in there anyway.
This is sweet. Thank you. Down in it.
Yeah, Richard, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Where you put it. Now, there's one more of these. Right, Monday.
Yeah.
What's better?
Yeah, they go back up to.
So basically, this table on the stage, we've got one projector, much smaller, and
You can take one of these.
so that should be
You can tell Jack off for running away
marvellous.
because he did run away.
Did he run away?
Yeah, he said that's not a good use of your time, and then he ran away.
Who ran away?
Jack ran away when we were doing the highlights. They did do such a good job with it.
What a child.